in the late 70s, a general upsurge, a growth of interest in human rights law evolved, particularly stimulated by things like the Biko inquest that shocked the country and shocked the profession. There then was the major human rights conference in Cape Town in January 79. The conference was a major undertaking, a major clarion call, a wake-up call for the legal profession, largely because Chief Justice Corbett participated. It was most unusual for judges in that era to get involved in anything other than merely delivering judgments in court. These discussions culminated in a little working committee, or more than one working committee, with Cowles at Wits under John Dugard doing most of the admin work. An executive was elected. I was elected as the first chair of the organization. I do claim one thing: the initiative for the name was mine. This concept that human beings have inherent rights by virtue of their humanity, and that these rights include a whole host of entitlements, was revolutionary. It was unheard of in lawyers' circles. But I think the most important impact at the time was to bring the theory of human rights and the articulation of it in learned articles into the reality of life in South Africa as it was.
Hanging was the order of the day then, because when we were in the offices and we would hear the machine, the siren of the guillotine go off, we would know that now maybe some of our clients were going to get killed. And by that time, the clients, the mothers, the parents of the inmates there would be in the office, sitting with me at the reception. We would close our eyes and pray for them.
So Lawyers for Human Rights had a continuous program on opposing the death penalty, and as part of that, we had a colleague, the late Jacques Stefaniazzo, who regularly went to death row in Pretoria to find out who had received notification of their imminent execution, and Lawyers for Human Rights then intervened to try to prevent that execution. So when the new Constitutional Court was set up, the first case that was brought before the court was a case that challenged the death penalty, and I was the attorney of record for Lawyers for Human Rights and for the Society for the Abolition of the Death Penalty. So we were not the main litigants, but we came in as what is known as amicus curiae, or friends of the court. And Professor Dennis Davis at the time, now retired judge, was our main counsel. It was absolutely formidable watching the best legal minds in South Africa arguing against each other. The outcome was that the court declared the death penalty unconstitutional, and it was really a joyous moment for all those of us who are arguing against the death penalty.
The organization has developed specialist programs that range from refugee and migrant rights, land reform, housing, security of farm workers, detention, prisoner rights, and in all these different areas, the organization has brought precedent-setting cases and cases that impacted beyond just the individuals on whose behalf the cases were brought.
You know, it still continues to inspire me how a bunch of lawyers can so critically understand the importance of movement building, the importance of a community being mobilized, and that litigation on its own is of little value unless it is instigated and owned and controlled and supported by a movement of people.
I think LHR has really made its way as one of the more adventurous litigators, taking on cases that no one else would take on and developing jurisprudence. But I think for that jurisprudence work to really pay off, a lot more work has to be put into the advocacy efforts, and not necessarily with LHR leading, but supporting communities towards reconceptualizing how democracy works for them, pushing towards active citizenry.
In 2014, when everything started to be clear that the community is not going to be given a fair hearing in terms of the processes, I was approached by the community as a leader to approach lawyers for human rights. The first one was the spoliation case, which lawyers for human rights representing us, we won it. And then the man went back to the court applying for eviction, that is Mafeking High Court. They were granted the eviction, and fortunately we won the leave to appeal, and the Constitutional Court set aside the decision that was made by the Mafeking High Court. The community was very happy with the outcome. Everybody was ululating, and that started the process of the mine consulting properly with us, and out of that we managed to get a settlement order with the mine, whereby the mine promised us to buy some additional portions of land. They bought 3 farms for us. And the most important one was for the mine to recognize and allow us to establish a committee that was going to look after the interest of the community.
In the Mary case, under apartheid, black women couldn't own property because they were regarded as minors. And the new legislation didn't think about that when they started to give title deed to black families, and they basically gave it to the person whose name was on that register, and that would have been a male. So Mary Ruby stayed in her house for 40 years, but under the name of her brother, who's got his own house. So when they got now the title deeds, it was given to her brother and not to her. So we challenged that.
Ke batlile thuso ka taba ya hore he re tsena ko mabopane ka 1970 ke he ile hore ena brother ra na le na tsena school ne ke mo tlhatswetsa ke mo ainela ke mo apela, so ha gola ka tseno aina o bona nna ke tshwantse ke tswe ka mole, and that time a ke sa bereka, I'm a pensioner now. Yes, that is why ke tlile ke batla thuso, ke batla itse hore ke ya kae, ka that is our family house.
And that law was found unconstitutional. And we are now, what's more exciting about it is we are now, the legislation was amended, we made submissions, and Mary's case, her application to ask the court to declare her the owner of the property will be now in the next week or 2 will be issued.
I started up the statelessness unit from a time where we had no idea what statelessness was to how it exists currently. And I think at that time when we worked on the detention monitoring work and the weekly Lindela visits and visits to prisons all across the country, it was extremely difficult work. It continues to be difficult work, but I think there's a different context to the work now. It's become more professionalized, which is amazing to see.
This program was set up in 1996, and I think that's significant in that it was at the cutting edge, right at the point when our Refugee Act was being formulated. And at the time, and it continued for a few years, that our policies on refugees and migrants was a hallmark for the world. It was referred to as one of the most progressive policies. And I think that's because of the contribution of organizations like Lawyers for Human Rights, who were part of the process around the various opportunities for appealing decisions that are made by government officials. And what we've seen, unfortunately, is the unraveling of that law in terms of practice and disrespect for what is law and policy. And combined with that, a progressively xenophobic, institutionalized xenophobic attitude towards migrants in general, but in particular, in our experience, people coming from the African continent.
LHR's efforts have impacted the global international human rights efforts. We have supported a lot of different causes, particularly around international criminal law, pushes against the end of genocide, issues around global birth registrations, things that require regional attendance. We have supported the development of a lot of our regional and African human rights chapters, the SADC Tribunal, the African Court. We have worked with the SADC Secretariat around the mixed migration dialogue to try get regional migration policies in a similar way to what we have in East Africa. And a lot of our international detention work has been about sharing best practices here and in other countries throughout the region. And then we've obviously focused a lot of our work on South Africa's role in international criminal justice, prosecuting international criminals. We've been involved in the al-Bashir matter, and the Covenhoven matter, who was an arms dealer that affected the whole Horn of Africa and was convicted of war crimes, ensuring that we could get him extradited to face justice.
The legacy that LHR has built and leaves behind over the 45 years is in the advocacy work, is in the publications, and in the strategic litigation. LHR has developed a real skill in the strategic litigation that it has developed over many years. And this has influenced other organizations, other individuals, other judiciaries in other countries.
We obviously covering, as you can see from the title, strategic litigation for systemic change.
I think as LHR, we really place a huge value on mentorship and learning, because it aligns with our mission and values of just a sustainable public interest law sector. We really do believe in paying it forward.
As an intern, I'm learning. That's the basic thing. It's a learning curve. They give us an opportunity to consult with clients and have an experience of a first-hand consultation and probably dealing with a legal problem.
I think it is a challenge these days for organizations like LHR, who have always tried to combine strategic legal advocacy with having a presence across the country through its law clinics. But it has become very expensive, and unfortunately that kind of funding and resources are no longer available. So it will be a serious challenge for the organization on how it can maintain a presence, whether physically or through its services, to communities and groups who are often far away, not just in terms of actual distance, but also in terms of social distance.
I honestly wish that people could see the dedication and commitment of LHR staff to the work we do. They drop everything on weekends at any given point, and this is across our programs to assist.
The job of lawyers to work for human rights is an eternal job. It is innately what we are there to do.
A day's work at LHR is incredibly meaningful. So you don't go home feeling that you're inadequate, that you haven't done enough. So I think that it's been, it's quite emotional actually, because it has been one of my most impactful working experiences.